I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me back.
You got it. This draft class we talked about a month ago at the Senior Bowl. Now we're at the combine stage of things, and the quarterback class always the high-profile conversation. But as we know, with the Philadelphia Eagles, 13 could be an interesting spot at 13. So let's kind of focus in on them and get your read at this combine. How important is this week going to be to kind of rank where these guys are going to end up at the end of the week?
Well, I think it's really important for a team like the Eagles because they have a question mark at quarterback. And I don't blame them if they're reluctant to commit to Sam Bradford long term. If it were me, I wouldn't do it. I just think best case scenario, Sam Bradford's going to be an Alex Smith level quarterback where, yeah, he might be good enough to get you to 10 wins and get you into the playoffs, but I just don't know that you're going to win a championship with him. And with his durability issues, you just can't count on him. So if I'm the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm absolutely in the market for a quarterback. And all of the top signal callers are going to throw at the combine this year, which is a little bit of a rarity. Usually one or two of the top guys waits until their pro day. But as of right now, at least everybody is planning to compete. And it's not just the stuff on the field, but it's going to be the stuff off the field in the meeting rooms. Who has the most? Who shows the intelligence to pick up the playbook? Who's most ready to come in and play right away. But if I'm the Eagles, the guy I'm looking at in round one is Paxton Lynch from Memphis, who, in my opinion, shouldn't even last to 13. But if he is there for Philly, I think that would be a steal because I think he has the most upside of any quarterback in this entire class. Maybe a little bit more of a project than Carson Wentz, but he's my quarterback too, and I just think Paxton Lynch has true franchise quarterback potential.
Yeah, and, I know last year talking to you a lot, Scott, you were a big fan of Winston, Mariota. Do you put Lynch anywhere near that group of guys, or, is he a big step down from those two?
He's not there yet. I think long-term he has that type of upside, but he's just a little bit further behind on the developmental curve. And that's why I gave Carson Wentz from North Dakota State a slight edge over over Lynch for my top quarterback spot, but it's really close. I think I have them both somewhere right in the back end of my top 10 overall. And then I'm not quite as high on Jared Goff from Cal, who was a guy we haven't talked about yet. I'm not nearly as enamored with him as a lot of people, and it kind of seems like it's shaping up to be a Wentz-Goff battle, but to me, Goff is kind of a distant third between Wentz and Lynch. I'm distant, maybe isn't the right word, but to me there's clearly a drop-off from Wentz and Lynch to Goff.
What is it about Lynch? I mean, I know he's a big guy, and some people thought that in that Chip Kelly system that he's a guy who kind of ran something similar to that when he was in college. 6'7". Some people said he's got that big frame on him. So what is it about Lynch that you like at the next level?
Well, you see that size, and it's incredible, 6'7", 245, and you think Joe Flacco, but he's a much better athlete. Now, he's not a Michael Vick type who's going to be running around making plays with his legs a lot, but definitely a much better athlete than you'd expect for somebody with his dimensions. I kind of compare him to a Brock Osweiler type of player. He's that prototypical pocket passer, really strong arm, can make all the throws. Well, one thing I like about him is he's got great touch down the field on the deep balls. The only issue with Lynch is development. He just needs a little more time to clean up some of his technical issues and kind of adjust to a pro-style system, which is going to be a pretty big change from what he's used to operating in college, but it's going to be a big change for Jared Goff as well. And I think we've seen in recent years with the quarterback position that just because a player didn't do something in college doesn't necessarily mean he can't do it in the NFL. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Lynch, but I just have a hard time seeing him fall out of the top half of the first round with so many teams in need of a quarterback and considering his upside. But this is the type of year, there's a lot of depth at quarterback, especially after last year, which was just maybe the worst quarterback class I've seen beyond Winston and Mariota. This year you legitimately have players beyond the first round that you could see developing into not only contributors in the NFL, but maybe even potential starters eventually.
Well, I mentioned Goff. Obviously, a lot of people have him, anywhere from 2 to, falling down to around the Eagles at 13. What are some of the pros and cons about him?
Yeah, and very productive. He operated that quick, some might call it gimmicky air raid offense at Cal. It's going to be quite what he's going to have to run at the NFL level, but that doesn't mean he can't do it. A little on the side, they listed him at 6'4", 215. It's going to be interesting to see where he checks in at physically, but definitely needs to put a little more and add some additional bulk. And he does everything pretty well across the board. There's not one major deficiency in his game, but there's also not one thing I don't think that you can point to and say he does incredibly well either. He's solid, and I would not blame a team for taking him in the top half of the first round if they need a quarterback. I think I have him at number 13 overall in my rankings. I just would absolutely prefer Wentz or Lynch given the choice. And I guess my biggest reservation with Goff is early in his college career, specifically in 2014, he took a lot of punishment. The line in front of him was just absolutely abysmal, and he developed some bad habits, and that scares me because I'm sure he'll look fine during this pre-draft process when there's no pass rush, but when the real bullets are flying, there's a tendency to revert back to those bad habits that you develop. So that's what scares me a little bit with Goff. But like I said, I have no trouble taking him in the top half of the first round. I just prefer Wentz and Lynch.
How much is this week going to be more so for Wentz than the other guys because of him being from North Dakota State, and how much is this going to really create a lot of buzz for him, or both positively or negatively? Is he the guy that people are going to be watching the most of this group?
Yeah, it's going to be a good test, and he got a little taste of it at the Senior Bowl where he was kind of the star of that week. All of the attention and focus was on him, and coming from North Dakota State, I'm sure he wasn't quite accustomed to that level of attention, and it's going to be the lights are going to be even brighter in Indianapolis. So I'm sure teams are going to be watching to see how he deals with that, in addition to all of his responsibilities, both on and off the field. Meeting with teams is going to be extremely important. We all focus on the field drills, but really the most important things of the scouting combine are the medical checks and then the meetings with teams. And for Wentz, I just think he needs to show his football knowledge, show that he can pick up a playbook and show that he's ready to come in. And if you're the Cleveland Browns sitting at number 2, you need him sooner rather than later. You can't afford to wait 3 years for someone to develop. I think he has to come in but if he impresses them, I think he's going to be the favorite for the number 2 overall pick in the entire draft. I really do. And plus Wentz, not only is the attention going to be on him and the focus and pressure, but just as the top quarterback in any draft, there's going to be a heightened level of a focus on them anyways. So Carson Wentz is going to have a lot to deal with. He's not going to be in North Dakota anymore.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. Who's number 4 then? Who's that next guy that people should have their eyes on, or is there a next couple of guys that people should have their eyes on? It seems like Goff, Wentz, and Paxton Lynch are those top 3. Who's next?
Well, the one I like is Cardale Jones from Ohio State, and I'm probably higher on him than many, but I think he might have as much upside for a non-first-round quarterback as I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. I truly believe that you could be getting top 10 overall type of talent in Cardale Jones beyond the first round. Now, there's risks as well, and there's a reason he's going to be available. But if I were one of these teams in what I like to call quarterback purgatory, where they're not good enough to compete for a championship, but they're not bad enough that they're going to bottom out and be picking at the top of the draft, whether it be maybe the Eagles, maybe the Rams, maybe the Texans, organizations like that, I'd be zeroing in on Cardale Jones, but I think Connor Cook from Michigan State's going to be in that discussion. Christian Hackenberg from Penn State's going to be a very controversial prospect. He looked like a future number 1 overall pick as a freshman, and his career has kind of steadily been trending downward since Bill O'Brien went to the NFL, but maybe there's a potential reunion between those two in the NFL and Houston. So this is a good year for quarterbacks. Even well into day 3, you look at Jeff Driscoll from Louisiana Tech, Jake Coker from Alabama, Kevin Hogan from Stanford. There's going to be legitimate options at the quarterback position this year as opposed to last year where it was basically Winston Mariota or bust. So
if you have the option of, a franchise tag on Sam Bradford or signing him for 3 years, is there, a guy in this draft that you think has a higher ceiling than what Bradford would give you if you retained him?
And I should probably preface it by saying I've never been the biggest Sam Bradford fan. I wasn't as high on him as a lot of people coming out of college. And the reason is the durability. I just think and it's through no fault of his own. Players get hurt. It's a rough game, but you just cannot count on Sam Bradford, especially at that position. He is almost single-handedly destroyed, 3, 4, 5 seasons in the NFL with injuries. You just can't have it. I just would not take that chance on him. Would he be safer than maybe any of the quarterback prospects in this draft? Yeah, probably. But is he going to help you accomplish your goal? And if your goal is to win championships, I don't think he'd get you there. I'd rather start from scratch, even if it's a bigger risk with a young player. But if they think Sam Bradford can get them there, that's the way they should go. But I just don't think he can. And even if I felt he had the talent to do it, I wouldn't be willing to risk to bet on his health.
The scouting combine is getting underway, and obviously that quarterback spot for Philadelphia. A lot of people starting to mention, you just mentioned Scott, Paxton Lynch at number 13. Realistically, do you think one of those three guys falls to 13? And if so, which guy has the best shot of being that one?
Yeah, I think it's possible, and it's a little bit strange this year where a lot of the teams picking near the top of the draft don't necessarily have a need at the quarterback position. And part of it is because a lot of them have brought in young signal callers in recent years. So I think there's a chance that one of them is there. I do think Wentz is going to go to the Browns at 2. I think the writing is kind of on the wall there. I think that's becoming more and more clear. And then that's where it's going to get interesting. Will the Cowboys take one at number 4? I think that's the $64,000 question for Philly, because that could start to run on quarterbacks early. But I don't think Dallas is taking a quarterback, which means the next possible spot, barring a trade up, would be San Francisco at number 7. I'm sure they would love Jared Goff. And then you just have to worry about somebody trading up in front of you. So there's really only a small handful of teams in the top half of round 1 that have a young quarterback as their top priority going into the draft, which is going to help Philadelphia. And I'm sure it's probably going to play into their decision-making when they're deciding what to do with Sam Bradford.
Yeah, and, with the wild card Wentz there, he puts up some great numbers here. You wonder if somebody like a Dallas just gets that seems like the kind of team that could jump on a guy like that if he puts up big numbers at an event like this.
Yeah, and of course Dallas has been linked to Wentz because they coached him at the Senior Bowl, so they got that up-close and personal look at him both on and off the field for an entire week. And Tennessee has already let it be known that they're willing to move down from the number 1 overall pick. They know that they could move down a little bit and still address one of their needs. They've got their quarterback in Mariota, so that pick is available. It's just a matter of whether or not somebody's willing to come up and pay the price to get ahead of the Browns for Wentz, but that's a legitimate possibility.
Scott, what's his story? Why is he at North Dakota State? Here's a guy that's a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, late bloomer. What's his deal?
Yeah, well, he definitely developed a little late physically in high school, but then also was injured late in his high school career, which kind of dampened the recruiting offers. And then he went to North Dakota State, and he sat for 3 years, but the reason he sat for 3 years is because the guy ahead of him was winning national championships. They won 3 straight national championships, so you're not going to bench that guy who was a pretty good player, not nearly the pro prospect that Wentz is, but a very good college football player. And then Wentz took over the last 2 years and led the Bison to 2 national championships himself. So it's just a matter of being a late developer because he's got everything you look for in terms of the physical tools, the size, the arm strength, the athleticism. He has the intangibles. By all accounts, a very good kid, extremely smart. There's always going to be a concern coming from North Dakota State, but at the lower level of competition. But I think what he did at the Senior Bowl went a long way towards alleviating those concerns because he came in and looked like he belonged right off the bat. And a lot of times with small school prospects, you see them struggle the first day or two until they get their feet wet, maybe adjust to the speed. Not Wentz. He came in and was adjusted right away, both on and off the field. So I really do think Wentz, if he doesn't go number 2, he's going to go number 1. I think that he's going to be the story of the 2016 NFL Draft. I don't know that he's the best player, the most talented player, but it's all about quarterbacks, and he's going to be the player that everyone focuses on in the next couple months here.
It seems that this is, and we talked last time briefly on the wide receiver position, and I think Laquan Treadwell is probably the main guy there, and he's not going to run. But what's that position like in this year's draft? Because it seems like that position has been loaded the last couple of years.
It really has been loaded the past couple of years. So we've been, I think we've become a little spoiled maybe. And this is a good wide receiver class, just not great like the last 2 years. And Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss, I think, is going to be the first wideout off the board. It's just a matter of how early, and that's going to be decided based on how he runs in workouts, because speed is the big question. If he runs well, he might go in the top 7 overall. If he runs in the 4-6 range, he might be more of a top 16 type of talent. But somewhere in the top half of the first round would be Treadwell. And then it's going to be interesting to see what happens next. I have Corey Coleman from Baylor as my number 2. Just had an extraordinarily productive season for the Bears. explosive. I mean, maybe the most explosive player in this entire draft. But then you have Josh Doxson from TCU, who's kind of battling for a spot late in the first round. Braxton Miller from Ohio State, who I'm a huge fan of. Michael Thomas from Ohio State. And there's depth. You're going to be able to get very good receivers in not only the first round, but second round, third round. I think the two areas it's lacking, it doesn't have that elite prospect, pass-catching prospect at the top. And the depth isn't nearly as good. You're gonna run out of really good options, maybe somewhere around that fourth, fifth round range. Whereas last year you were basically getting mid-round talents in the late rounds.
Scott Wright's with us, DraftCountdown.com, and how many guys in this draft, Scott, do you think are legitimate number one overall players?
Well, this is a stronger draft at the top overall than I think we've seen in a while. And I'm really stingy with my elite grade. I think the most I've given it to in any 1 year was 4 players. And past few years, it's been 1 player a year, basically. This year, I think Laramie Tunsil from Ole Miss, the offensive tackle, is a pretty safe bet. He's going to get that grade. And there's probably 3 or 4 more who are in the conversation. Jalen Ramsey, the cornerback from Florida State. The 2 linebackers, Miles Jack from UCLA and Jalen Smith from Notre Dame, are pretty special prospects at their positions, although their status is clouded a little bit by the injury. And then Joey Bosa, the defensive end from Ohio State. So I think this is a really solid draft through the top 4, 5, 6 picks. It just doesn't necessarily have the top quarterback prospect being from North Dakota State. I think is going to hurt it a little bit in terms of the flash factor, but it's a strong draft at the top, no question. I think I'm probably going to have 2 or 3 elite prospects.
Yeah, it should be, when you don't have a quarterback as a number one overall player, sometimes I guess that makes the top half of that first couple picks a lot more interesting when the intrigue's there. Last year, it seemed like it was Winston or Mariota, and this year it doesn't seem. Would you be shocked if a quarterback went number one?
No, not at all. And I don't think it's going to be the Tennessee Titans. I think that would absolutely be in a trade down.
It would be a trade.
If somebody's enamored with Wentz, absolutely. They know they have to get Cleveland Browns at number 2. And the other part of that, too, is I think the Baltimore Ravens could be in a pretty good spot at number 6 overall, because we think the San Francisco 49ers at 7 might be zeroing on a quarterback, especially if Goff is still available. So if you covet Jared Goff, you have to get ahead of the Niners. So I think there could be a couple spots in the top 10 here where we could see some maneuver one of these quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, really, Rickley, the question really is, are any of these quarterbacks worthy of a number one choice? Because, as you said, someone would have to probably make a deal, because at Tennessee you wouldn't see them, but is somebody worthy of making –
Yeah, well, and my theory has always been it's impossible to overpay for a good quarterback, and no one's going to care whether Carson Wentz was the second pick or the 12th pick. He turns into even a competent starting quarterback in the NFL. He's going to been worth whatever investment was made. So if one of these teams believe Carson Wentz can be their guy, there's really no price too high in my mind. I'm just a complete believer that unless you have a quarterback, nothing else matters.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. What about, you look at, we talked about wide receiver, Braxton Miller in there at Ohio State, a bigger name guy. He's making the change out there. Is he a guy that, third, fourth round guy? What's this week for him like?
Much higher. I think Braxton Miller is going to go in the top 50 overall, and I wouldn't even be shocked if he was a late first round pick. I'm a huge fan of Braxton Miller. He's one of my personal favorite prospects in this draft, and of course, everybody kind of knows his story. He was an all Big Ten performer as a quarterback, made the move to wide receiver before his senior season, and I actually interviewed him. The interview's up on the site. He basically talked about how he came back from the injury and he couldn't throw the ball more than 45 yards, and he kind of saw the writing on the wall and knew he had to make the position change. But what impresses me so much about him is not only is he a tremendous athlete, he's got very good size. He's 6'1" 3/8", 210 pounds. Tremendous athlete, incredible speed. He can create in space. He's a terror to tackle. But I was impressed by how quickly he's taken to the wide receiver position. Really, from game one, he looked like a natural. So much more polished than you'd expect from a guy that's only been playing that position for a year. Now, he still has some rough edges he needs to round out, but he's not this monumental project like we've seen with some other guys that are changing positions in recent years. So, like I say, I think Braxton Miller is going top 50, and I'm actually working on a new mock draft right now, and I'm going to have him going to the Cleveland Browns at the top of round 2 at number 32.
I know last time we talked about Eli Apple, Ohio State. local guy here, and he's another guy who seems like he's generating a lot of buzz. Maybe a little bit of a surprise that he came out, but he's a guy that might be a first-rounder.
Yeah, Eli Apple's kind of in that mix in the second, battling for a spot in that second-tier corners. Jalen Ramsey from Florida State's going to go in the top 5-6 overall picks at worst. And then you have Eli Apple, you have Vernon Hargreaves from Florida, Mackenzie Alexander from Clemson, kind of jockeying to see who's going to be that next corner off the board. And one thing Apple really has working in his favor is size. He's about 6'1", 200 pounds, whereas Hargreaves and Alexander, the big concern with them is height. They were both listed at 5'11". We kind of expect them to be 5'10"-ish. And you can definitely go in the first round as a cornerback at sub 6 foot, but it usually ends up being more in the back half than the top half. So if you're a team in the first round that's looking for a big corner, Eli Apple is probably going to be your best bet. So I think he's going to come off the board in round 1. I think the Steelers at 25 would be a perfect spot for him. He even lasts that long. But I think don't underestimate that factor of him having bringing something different to the table with his height than the other guys he's competing with.
Austin Johnson, Penn State, another local guy there. I've been hearing some first-round grades on him as well.
Yeah, well, defensive tackle this year is just ridiculously strong, the strongest position in this draft. And I legitimately believe we're going to have a defensive tackle that at one point during this process was being talked about as a potential first-round pick that's going to be available in round 4. It's that deep. And just kind of put in perspective even more, on average, there's about 9 defensive tackles taken in the top 3 rounds over the last decade. This year, I think we're going to be looking at 14, 15 maybe. It's just incredibly deep. And Austin Johnson is one of those guys who are in that mix. I have a top 50 grade on him. I think he's kind of underrated, to be honest. A tremendous blend of size and athleticism, and not particularly a flashy player, but I think a lot of what he does doesn't necessarily show up in the box score, and he kind of opened things up for other players to make those big splash plays along that defensive line for the Nittany Lions. And I think he's going to go somewhere back end of round 1, early to mid round 2, and the only reason he's not going to be a first round pick this year, if he isn't, is just because of the depth at the position, and there's only so many spots. So that could push all of these defensive tackles down a little bit further than they normally would. But Austin Johnson's a heck of a player, and like I say, I think second round somewhere. All
right. For more on the draft, visit draftcountdown.com. 64 days away. Scott Wright here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, Scott.
My pleasure. Anytime.